Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Gable. Let me quickly share my screen while everyone's trickling in. Perfect. So while everyone coming in, just a bit of a house rules. Make sure that if you want to comment, please change your Zoom chat settings to everyone, so everyone can see what you're asking or sharing. Feel free to ask questions. As you know, this is a very interactive and engaging session. And after this webinar, we'll definitely send a recording. So if you have to drop off early or want to rehear again what was asked, I'm happy to share this with you. So while everyone joining, let's get to know each other. Please write to us in the chat your name, your role, company, and where you're dialing in from. And with that, let's introduce our speakers. I'll let you introduce yourselves. Let's start with Joanna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna Zach. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the Senior Director of Workplace Experience at Sprout Social. I've been at the company for a little over 7 years, and I'm based out of Pennsylvania.
Amazing. No.
Hi, everyone. I'm Noel McNulty, and I'm the Senior Manager of Global Real Estate and Workplace Operations at Twilio. I've been with Twilio now for 5 years, and I am based out of our San Francisco headquarters.
Tiffany.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I am the Regional Manager for our North America spaces for Workplace Experience and Real Estate. And I've been at Grammarly for 8 years now, and I'm based in San Francisco.
Amazing. And today you're calling from the Toronto office. So everywhere. Amazing. Well, a little bit about Gable before we start with the webinar. So we are all-in-one platform to manage your hybrid and remote teams. We have a SKU of products ranging from access to on-demand spaces to your remote employees. We have a global coverage of over 8,000 spaces. We also have the ability to manage your own offices with desk and room booking, visitor management capabilities, and event orchestration capabilities, both on your on-site and off-site. So let's start with an audience poll. How many distinct RTO policies has your company launched since 2020? Interesting to see. Let's give it one more second. And let's close it. Okay, great. Interesting. So we already have some that have 3, 2, 1, none. Great. So I'm wondering if you'll be surprised with what you can see here. So we've recently launched a survey together with Nick Bloom and his team at Stanford Research, investigating the progress of RTO policies in general, what employees want and what companies provide them, different user behaviors, also what's the focus on events, offsites, and so on. And one of the things that we've seen that to me was quite astonishing is one, that the fact that there is no one size fits all. We can already see it by the survey results, but also the fact that there are so many iterations of RTO policies and companies are really still struggling to understand what works for them. We've seen companies having even more than 5 RTO policies. I'm sure it's not easy to be in a company that had 5 RTO policies. But all of this to say that I think the overarching theme, and I'm sure we'll hear this also from our speakers, is that we are still figuring this out. And every company really needs to understand what works for them and for the employees, which might not be a blanket policy, basically. Also, one of the things that we've seen that are contributing to the fact that there are so many RTO policies is, one, lack of development of comprehensive policies to address different scenarios, right? So we have remote employees, we have hybrid employees, we have in-office. How do you create equitability in the workplace for that? Also struggles in adapting that. there is a fine line between mandating to come to the office and suggesting to come to the office, and how do you focus on collaboration engagement in that sense? And finally, what works to get results? What makes employees more effective? What is more clear? What are the clear communication guidelines in order to discuss the workplace policies that you have and implement that as well? So there are a lot of challenges that workplace and people leaders are currently having, especially, at the end of the day, employees in those companies as well. So with that, without further ado, wanted to kick us off with questions to our panelists to discuss, to chat and share a little bit about their workplace strategy. So I'll start with Joanna. You can share a little bit about Sprout Social workplace strategy and overall workplace configuration.
Yeah, so Sprout Social has about 1,500 full-time employees. We are based across the globe, so APAC, EMEA, US, Latin America, Canada, all over. And we have 4 brick and mortar offices, which range in size from about 19,000 square feet to 128,000 square feet. And we have an employee base where 50% of our employees, so 50% of that 1,500, is no longer based near an office. So we're really kind of smack in the middle right now in terms of who is in a local population and who is remote. Sprout does not have an official return to office mandate. We have a hybrid philosophy, and so far it has been going well, but there are definitely areas of iteration that we have done over the years, and I'm excited to talk about those things today. I think you're muted, Lisa.
Noel, how about you?
Yeah, so we have around, at Twilio, we have around 6,300 employees across the globe, again, similar to Sprout, APJ, EMEA, LATAM, Canada, and North America, of course. We have 7 offices remaining with our SF headquarters, and then we have Dublin, Bengaluru in India, Tallinn, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, and Sydney. We are a remote first company, so 2/3 of our population are globally distributed and not tied or located near any one of the offices that I just mentioned. And these days our offices are largely, I would say, event centric and sort of hospitality focused. People are definitely enjoying the flexibility that comes with being a remote first company. We use Zoom heavily for a lot of our collaboration efforts. And when we have our events, they're largely offsites in office and sometimes externally, but largely we see a lot of activity in the office centering around events and hospitality.
Tiffany, last but not least.
Great. So we have 7 hubs. So we're a remote first hybrid with like intentional team on site. So teams really get to pick when they choose to come in, really like for their planning cycle or to really solve a hard problem. So really those team on sites consist of like 3 to 4 days together to build connections, solve hard problems. And then the team really chooses that valuable time. And then the workplace team, the IT teams, we kind of provide the tools, the process, the space, the setups to really help them plan their on-sites. And then the remainder of the time, individuals choose how they want to get together. If they want to just stay at home, they want to come and co-work. So we actually have a lot of, like, I would say, as you know, North America specifically, a growing number of locals coming in. We have 7 hubs specifically still. We have Vancouver, San Francisco, Kyiv, Ukraine, where we were founded, New York City, Seattle, and Berlin and Krakow, Poland. So yeah, we have about 1,000 employees and over 120,000 square feet.
Amazing. Again, all are very distributed. That's another overarching trend. So I'll kick us with a question to Joanna. So you're basically doing a lot of things as leading workplace experience, from onboarding to real estate and events. So can you share a little bit about what was the most challenging thing in order to manage both hybrid, remote, and at the end of the day global workforce of over 1,500 employees?
I'm muted. I caught myself.
You
So
good?
I would say, so just speaking about one of the things that we've found challenging is really figuring out how we make the most of our in-person time together. What I didn't speak to during my introduction is that we host a significant number of events on site in our offices for our local populations. We also do international meetups for our EMEA and APAC populations. And then we also have like 16 or 17 locations throughout the US and Canada where we have big booming numbers of employees that are not near offices. And we have figured out that we give those locations a budget and they get together 2 times a year for a happy hour to build local community. So going back to the question of what we found most challenging, it's really how you build a sense of inclusion. I was trying to use engagement and inclusion, engagement, excitement, to be a part of the company and to be a part of your local community when there's not that consistent going into a spot, and you just don't have that as your regular cadence. We have found that the events that we currently have, what we offer, is doing that at a team, department, and local level, and that's really where we're seeing some success come into play. We used to do an org-wide event. All of Sprout would come together. We weren't seeing like the connection that we really wanted to see on an authentic and inclusive basis with that large of an event. It just wasn't doing it for us. Separate and apart from the gathering piece, one of the areas where we are seeing a shift from pre-pandemic to now is leaning on managers more when it comes to onboarding. So before, we found that like there was a lot of things that would happen in the office that supported with the onboarding experience. There was a lot of ambient learning. There was a lot of innovation that was just happening by being in a physical space with others. And now that so many people are remote or hybrid, we really are leaning more on managers to usher along that new hire in a more intentional and inclusive way.
And that's very interesting. And we see this a lot, basically the fact that, at the end of the day, when employees are onboarding remotely, they have to have someone very dedicated to them. Usually it's the regional manager, instead of, anyone else, basically the company, the top level. And I'm sure you've done a lot of processes to facilitate that and learned a lot. Thank you. And I wanted to ask you mentioned that basically Twilio offices are hospitality centric. Can you share a little bit about, how Twilio become a place to help employees stay connected and build those relationships in person, and what do you do for that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we spent probably the second half of last year specifically building framework for how folks could gather. So we have sort of two avenues right now, which are, one is internal. We use ServiceNow as a ticketing system. So we stood up an event support ticketing system where the event host can put the request in. It hits all of the cross-functional teams internally, and then we actually, go to town and start to help to plan the details for those particular events. Again, largely we're seeing a lot of offsites. So we have several locations several zones in our offices that cater to the different sizes, you will. I mean, we have 50 to 60, sometimes 100-person events that we run. And then, so that's the in-office part of things. So people fly to, let's say, San Francisco as an example. They're here for 2.5 days. All the programming is in the office, catering, sort of fireside chats, team building activities, things like that. Then we have the population who, of course, are not close to an office or decide not to necessarily come into one of our offices. So we work with our travel partners at Navan, and we kind of have a bit of a white glove service where if you are a large group and depending on where folks are located, you choose a location that's sort of maybe shorter in time so everybody shares the pain of the travel part of this. And then there's outside venues, generally at hotels, and our partners negotiate, these contracts and basically help to establish, the workflow, or sorry, the event flow, I should say, for the 2.5 days events. And so they're the two tracks at the moment that we're currently operating off of.
Thank you, super interesting. Tiffany, you mentioned that basically Grammarly is a remote first hybrid. And you talked about the key moments to spend together every quarter. Can you share a little bit similar to Noel in terms of how do you operate those key events, those hubs? What's the operational process that you need to that you have put in place in order to facilitate that at scale?
Yeah, I think, what Noel said a lot, like rang true for Grammarly too. So, this came through a lot of trial and error as well. When we first chose the remote first hybrid model, I really believe we picked the hardest, but it's turned out to actually be one of the most rewarding, where we asked, teams pick 20% of the time when they want to come in, build those connections. Like, Joanna was talking about, it's super important to have. And then the 80%, people can be virtual, they can work from home. And what we're seeing more of is like people are actually coming into the hub to work with local team members. And then we have also extension of Gable. So like, if there's overspill space and our hub can't be used, like, people can book on Gable, or if like they're feeling alone, they can gather, with the Denver locals to kind of work at a hub for the day. But how we operationalize them in the hub is we run 2 tracks. So we run the co-working day-to-day business as usual. So we really have a baseline, and the baseline of, lunch and snacks every day. There's janitorial. Our plant vendor comes in every week, right? Supplies, like your usual stuff. And then when we call it these on-site weeks that these teams pick, we really flex up our services. Really, there's added breakfasts every day. There's added janitorial services, movers on standby if we have to move furniture for events. And then we host a hub event for the week to gather everybody together, locals or people on site, so that everybody can meet together. And so it's really like a team effort. We've also tried and this a lot too. Right now, the connection team like owns that piece of like helping teams book their onsite, but then they partner then really closely with the local ops team for that office to operationalize everything, and IT as well. And so everybody's kind of just like talking with each other, make sure like it's executed really smoothly. And I think one thing like we've aligned with the business on that it also took it took a while and a lot of trial and error is like, we told the business that we would prioritize the team on sites when those times when people are coming in, because that's what the company paid for. Everyone's travel. That's what we paid for everyone to really be successful. So again, that's why we have like tools and we partner with Gable, is because, our New York hub, for example, only can house about 50 people. So if a team goes there, to what Lisa was saying, like, or Noel was saying, is like the middle ground between Europe and the West Coast. So there's like more overlap. They can book a space on Gable when we don't have enough space in the office.
Amazing. And one, it's the fact that you need to operational all of this, basically. It does need to be like a machine, basically, to do all of that. And I'm sure it's very similar in the sense of you need to submit the ticket and then, approval, and then to prepare all of it. And also, I think one of the biggest challenges, especially when you have, existing offices, the fact that you need to basically flex your offices, right, to accommodate different types of people. And I think that's part of the orchestration piece that you mentioned, that's very valuable. I'll shift gears a little bit. We want to launch a quick poll, so you'll see it in a second. Okay, have you ever considered using flex workspaces or co-working spaces to reduce real estate spend and to improve employee experience? Let's see what the audience think. Let's close this. Okay, a lot, the vast majority. Interesting. Great. Noel, I want to actually kick it to you for a question. One of the things that we talked about as a common thread are iterations of your workplace strategies and tactics, and how you as a leader decide basically when is it time to adjust the policy, and what level of input do you have from employees that at the end of the day are your customers for those decisions?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we basically, we call in-house sort of our sort of like remote first philosophy and narrative open work. So it is a cross collaboration, mainly run by the people team, but we have buy-in obviously and cross-functional conversations with folks in IT, AV, all areas of the business that essentially sort of support corporate security and travel. And ultimately sort of what that conversation is about is how do we allow Twilio and Twilions to thrive in this remote first environment? And how do we empower them to have the flexibility in how they work and also be able to support the choices of where they can work? Which currently, as I mentioned, are sort of in office or in outside external locations and venues, where we're able to support them for an offsite, a team meeting. It could be a customer meeting. We also have our TEC center in San Francisco for our customers, so we have a lot of activity there. We also just recently launched a pilot program to test out, if you will, and just sort of learn from what co-working would be like in the event that sort of folks want to sort of use that, because we heard a lot that we're not near these offices. If I'm not doing an offsite and I just want to get out of my house for a couple of hours, get away from my dog, my partner, whatever the case may be, or meet with another Twilion. So we're currently in phase 1 of that, just learning, I would say. I think that's really what it is, trying to understand sort of what's folks' new behaviors in this flexible world. And understanding, I think, also just like, how are people working? Because work is different these days. So it's very interesting. So far, it's been pretty successful. We're getting positive feedback. I would say as we go out from here, we're looking at other scenarios to support sort of similar to what was shared here, which is just like, maybe using that particular platform also to support a third avenue of event support, given that we're such a big company and folks are in so many different places. And, we did also extend our travel and expense, policy and budget for folks to be able to travel more. But just kind of fine tuning and refining that as we learn more about it, and then reframing on what it means to be a remote first company.
Ethan, there is actually a follow-up question for you now. Is what is your process to learn about the new ways of working?
Really what we do is after every booking, as an example for this pilot program that I just talked about, we send out a survey. And so we basically poll the folks and ask them a series of questions about how their experience was, what in this experience was positive, what could be different, how was the overall experience of being able to come together with colleagues, living in this kind of working in this globally distributed versus coming into an office, as an example. And so we're basically in a feedback loop. We also do a lot of pulse surveys. We do at least 2 twice a year, and there are questions that are specific to sort of the ways of working, if you will, that we take that information and then try to bring it back, review it, and figure out how we kind of put it back out into the world, if you will, and refine it from there.
Thank you. And actually a question to all of our speakers about that. Like, what data are you actually looking at? What things that you want to know, whether this is sensor data or utilization data? Curious to hear, how do you utilize data to make decisions? Whoever wants to start, but I think it's something I would love to hear from the speakers.
I can share a bit. So I think what's really important is a good combination of both quantitative and qualitative data. So we use an office occupancy system called Office Space, which tracks who's coming into the office by team, by location, and we just like to get a sense of like what numbers are we seeing in our various local areas. That's just important to inform our real estate strategy as we're making decisions, as leases come up and we're assessing what makes sense there. Also, I had mentioned that we do biannual team meetups, we do international meetups, we do local meetups, we do a lot of meetups at Sprout. And so one of the things that we do following all of these is kind of an immediate survey to attendees, to those that planned it and also to those that attended, to understand like what worked for you, what didn't work, was this a good use of your time, where can things be 10% better. We're very specific with our questions so that we're not opening up the floodgates of just like, tell us all the things. Rather, we're really trying to guide people towards like the things that we feel will be most impactful for our strategy moving forward. But I would say, similar to what Noel said, in terms of just like, we're just in a consistent feedback loop. Also, my workplace experience and employee experience teams are getting together on a bi-weekly basis. I mean, every other week, not twice a week, to kind of debrief on how our on-sites are going. What are we learning on the ground? What are we seeing? Where can we iterate? What do we keep going? Because I think everybody knows that this return to office, it's changing by the month, by the quarter. You know, it's always evolving. So you just have to keep a pulse on it.
Thank you. And it actually leads me to a follow-up question. And Tiffany, if you can share, like basically to continue Joanna's point of always evolving, right? So how did, your workplace strategy change in the past few years for employees that are in the office? How does this affect your, real estate and space planning, basically, especially with the transition and focus for your hubs to be effectively event hubs, right? So curious to hear this iteration process.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I think like a lot of other companies, it's a lot reactionary, right? So we have changed and we pivoted because like needs and behaviors have changed. So we take a pulse on occupancy, very similar to everybody, feedback, but we also like try to make bets on like kind of what's next and kind of like, figure out, being the subject matter expert, how do we solve that need? So I look at it in 3 different areas, like, it's the reality that for us right now, team members want to come into the office more. Whereas before you couldn't get them in North America to come in at all. But now that we're seeing like leadership come in, we're seeing actually a lot of the local population want to come in if they're near a hub. So we actually need to buffer more real estate now for the local population than we did before. To ensure we're really covering that critical mass. We want to be able to say yes a lot more than saying no when you're coming into a hub. And then another part is ensuring that our processes and space planning really meet the needs of that on-site experience. Again, like talking about like having the company bought on that these on-site experiences, we are going to prioritize them. So they're like, what we found is like, they're like events, almost like conferences. So when you go to a conference, do you remember everything of how that space worked? No, right? So how do we meet people really where they are now? How do we remove kind of those friction points? So how do we make sure that, there's preferred, hotels already, negotiated down? How do we make sure that ordering lunch is super easy, right? And repeatable? Always like, we don't want people every time they come in to spend all their energy figuring out really logistics, right? We want them to focus on really connecting. And then finally is like flexibility is super important. I think this is going to be like a workplace person's like saving grace when like the company wants to shift and you can't shift spaces all the time is, we really need to hold a space for a team of 10 and that to be really effective. And then a team of 80 and then 150. And we're really looking to build really more flexible event-like spaces that could be utilized for different purposes. So think war room, but think also I'm having a product all hands. So we're really gonna also then on top of that, try to partner again with like Gable or even with landlords. In San Francisco, we just signed a very long-term lease, our longest at Grammarly history, with our landlord BGO. And this was specifically because they promised to deliver an event amenities floor that we actually got on the ground to help design with them, with their architect. So that was really cool. So we'll be able to flex into that. And then in spaces that were like in locations we just, want to drop in and we're new to, like we did in Berlin, really a service office for that flexible event space is really useful to us.
Amazing. And actually, there was a great question from the audience. I'll read it out loud. How many, many of us are facing tighter budget constraints while also being asked with creating an engagement office environment, right? I'm sure it's a story of everyone's life now. What are some of the constraints that you have navigated, and what are some of the low-cost programs and experiences that you see are really successful? Who wants to take this?
I can mention one thing, which I'm not sure this is 100% getting at it, but like when we created our in-person strategy for 2024, we kind of revisit this on an annual basis and iterate, throughout the year. But when we did, we initially said, okay, everyone in our EMEA team is going to come to the US, and they will meet with their respective team members in the US. Also, budgets were such, this is getting real specific, but go on this journey with me. Budgets were such that like people who were flying for on-sites could only come for 2 nights. So we had our entire EMEA team that were coming to the US. But then we had people that were coming for team meetups that were like on the plane for 12 hours. And then like on site for 18 hours. And it was like, this is not a good employee experience for people. They're exhausted, they're back to back, it's not great. We realized that like bringing everyone over from EMEA actually didn't make sense from a budget perspective the more we thought about it, because really it's an internationally based team. They roll to an international manager. The most important thing is for them to get together with their teams. They should meet in EMEA. They don't need to schlep all the way over to the US. That makes no sense, and we're spending a significant amount of budget there. Could we instead increase the number of nights to 3 nights for individuals flying for team meetups, make it so they're less exhausted, keep EMEA where they are, and then everyone is benefiting from that. So rather than finding like low cost solutions, it's oftentimes looking at the budget that you have to work with, because that's not going anywhere. It's a set number, and like seeing what you can pull away from and add to benefit your employee base.
I love this answer. Anyone else has something similar to it?
Yeah, I think it's again as a trial and error one, especially if you're in a company where you are the subject matter expert only and they don't understand, right, the impact. So I would say like understand your survey data, what people are really complaining about, start to categorize that impact. We actually had opposite of but something similar to Spark Social, where we wanted people to come 5 days out of that week to travel, because like if you're gonna be we want to like optimize that week. But like people were giving up their weekends. I know, very unpopular, and people were just like very unhappy about it. And so, while the company thought, hey, let's do that, and then so we brought back that data to the executives, right? And we were really in line with our travel team, right? Another thing like we did is like we made everybody fly economy, or we didn't have these things. So we started to make things like okay to say, like, you don't have to take a red eye, and wake up and go right into the office, right? You don't have to be that gritty to that point. It's like, because like you need to balance also like your resources. So I would say like figure out what's the thing that's like, going to create the most impact for that goal. Like hunker on that goal. The goal is building connections, making sure that the company has return on investment. People feel like they're empowered when they come together, and then figure out what are those like friction points that are in the way for people to do that effectively. And it's like, how do we get, tools to help? How do we have like services help? And then how do we bring that back to like the executive to say, like, we really need to solve that. So like using that example, we had to say, hey, this is really driving, people crazy. Like, is it okay if we do 3 days instead, right? Where people aren't giving up their weekends? Is it another big thing that we put in, and I know it's huge, is like we put in dependent care costs, right, for pets and people with children, so that we gave people a budget to say, hey, we understand that, there's childcare and things like that. So again, like that came back from a lot of surveys, a lot of things. And then again, just going back up to the business and saying like, these we think are the most impactful things. And then, figure out like as time progresses, like executives, the business is going to hear about that. They're going to feel it. And sometimes like, quite frankly, you're going to have to let them feel it before, and then that's when like they'll start to enact change and they'll say, okay, I do want to give you that budget. But I will say like there have been like a lot, Grammarly has been through this for almost 3 years now. There has been a lot of pain points to get to where we are, and we still have just a lot to learn. So that's helpful.
I love this answer, and thank you for the candid answer as well. Noel, I saw that you came off of mute. Would love to hear you as well.
Yeah, I think the opportunity we're seeing right now is based on sort of like what we built last year, and kind of as people are starting to operate in these kind of two models that we have for coming together is that event planning overall takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of details, and folks are also trying to do their day jobs. And so what we're learning in this is that how we can make this as easy as possible, like hit that easy button where from a budget standpoint to a sort of like, I sent my ticket in, to streamlining sort of that, kind of almost creating a menu of choices based on the size of your team, the locations of where your team members are, the type of event, also sort of helping even when it comes to facilitating what it means to run a good offsite. If folks have not had that experience before, having some, examples and templates for them to use to be able to make all of that easier. I think I heard this week in a conversation we're having is like, how do we hit the easy button on this? Because even for teams who have their ABPs and their EVPs and their leaders come to them and say, I want this, event in 2 months' time or 3 months' time, it's like there's so much detail. So we're trying to trim it all down to kind of just make sure we can say, okay, if you want to do this, this is option A, this is option B, this is what comes with option B, this is what comes with option C. And then hopefully it starts to mold and fit into the various types of situations, because we're such a big company with various different size teams, different needs. And so I think that's where we're also saying and seeing that even for in office as an example, we've talked about this, our current design was built sort of like, in the midst of the pandemic, we built some dynamic spaces. And as we came out of R2O and brought people back in, it's not operating the same way. So also spending some more time just looking at the overall design. When we go to external sources, as an example, you go to the banqueting level of a hotel, everything is kind of all there for you. You've got your rooms, you step outside, you have your food, you have your little breakout spaces, you have your little happy hours, all of that stuff. Similarly, that sort of philosophy and that operation is starting to wind its way into our offices. So we're also trying to figure out, as we look at sensor technology data and event ticket data, and even examining those two things side by side to say, okay, my occupancy stats are telling me this. Does it match what the ticket says with all where these people were for 2.5 days? Great, and then sort of going a layer deeper again, and then getting feedback from the folks who use those spaces to say, how were those spaces for you? Were they good? Were they not good? What could we improve? And starting to build out from there. That helps to sort of, I think, inform as we look at real estate and honestly, what the purpose of the office is. I think that's a big conversation that our leadership are having right now. When I say come to an office, the purpose of coming in is this. I think I heard Tiffany touched on this a little bit earlier, versus a co-working situation where it's just that you want to meet your colleagues, meet a customer, and just get out of your house and just have a couple of hours somewhere, and you have a venue that it's easy and you don't have to think about it. Everything is kind of inbuilt for you. So these are the things that we're seeing as opportunities. And then lastly, I would say, like, work overall, it's an exciting time because I think work has changed for everybody. So just figuring out, how people are working and how that gets integrated to the various real estate pieces that we have to manage and operations that we have to think about going forward.
That's an amazing answer, and thank you, Jesse, for asking such a thoughtful question that made everyone really speak their heart. Thank you. Joanna, question to you. So one of the things that you mentioned at the beginning as part of your, your policy is that you enable employees to work from anywhere, and you have 50% of employees that are actually not close to an office, right? How do you manage this? Like, how do you manage these choices? How does it affect your real estate strategy, utilization, space planning you mentioned? Curious to hear.
Yeah, so from a talent perspective, it's great for us that we have this, like, flexibility. You can choose whatever you want to choose. From a workplace perspective, it's a little tough because it's kind of like the Wild West. My team is very much like, oh, this month we've had X number of people come in, and the next month it's a completely different scenario. So the predictability is really very, very, very hard. It's hard to craft a real estate strategy with something that is so kind of up and down and roller coastery. What I will say is, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, like, we have leaned heavily on consistent feedback. So we have really, really continue to source both qualitative and quantitative feedback in terms of, like, what is working for you in our offices, what is not working for you with our offices. We've also piloted quite a bit in our offices. So for example, we have a Dublin space that we moved into in 2022. So this is kind of, we're midway through the pandemic, we're coming out of it, but we're still in it. We have about 70 people in that office, but we only have 30 desks, and we put the rest of it as collaborative space. 2 floors, very different process and policies than we have done in any of our other offices. And we intentionally did an early lease break so that we could make sure that we had the opportunity to pilot, but also if we got it wrong, we had an out. And what we have learned is that for a time that was working, and we had a lot of people coming in and they just wanted to collaborate, and few people coming in just wanting to focus and sitting at their desk. And now we're seeing, as Tiffany spoke to, more and more people want to come in and they want to have their own workstation and they want to have space. So good thing we have the early lease break, because we will be moving on to find an office that can offer more desk space. So that isn't always the reality. Sometimes you're locked into a lease and there's no way to get out of it. But those are some areas where we are trying to create as much flexibility in our strategy and our policies as possible, because we oftentimes don't know what we don't know.
And I think it's an overarching thread between all of your answers and thoughts is you're piloting, you're iterating, right? And it's a very interesting thing, because part of, I would say, challenges also of piloting and having a lot of tools is tool fatigue, basically. And how do you help? And I'm bringing, like, one of my questions, some of the audience questions, how do you navigate implementing tools and helping users not having basically tool fatigue of what to use, what, when, and where? Tiffany, I'll address this to you, but would love to hear everyone's thoughts there as a final question.
Sure. So keep it simple. I think there's 3 principles I kind of, again, trial and error and have learned. So I think it's like, pick one tool for that need, and within your team, make sure that, you get buy-in that we're all using that tool. So it's not going to be perfect, but it's really important that the team specifically, and what you can control, is not context switching between different tools and trying to learn different tools for one need. So use one tool. I would say 2 is really train and try to reinforce, right, behaviors. Like, a tool is only effective if you have the right behaviors around it as well. And so it's really important, like, for example, the workplace help desk, right? It's like 99% of all of your requests should probably funnel through there. And then reinforce that, right behavior with your client, with your customer, by giving great response times and full answers, right? You're not just they're not calling into, they're calling into, a colleague, right? So make sure that, your team members aren't really answering that many questions via Slack one-on-one, and they're really, funneling everything through there so that you can also scale your services later. And then I would say the 3rd is, this is a hard one because you just implemented, you paid for it. So flexibility with your tool as well. But change the process or change the tool. You know, and this is why like partnering with a tool is really, you know, useful. Once like the times change or the behaviors change, right? And the business needs change, make sure that you're not using that tool and you're continue using that tool if the need has completely changed, because now that's where like fatigue is really going to set in. So I'll hint like, you know, like desk booking really made a lot of sense originally, you know, coming at from the pandemic. But I think the question is like, does it make sense now anymore, manually asking people to, you know, book a desk? And I think that's a question we're trying to answer as well.
Perfect. Anyone else has something to add here?
Yeah, I will just maybe ride on Tiffany's coattails there and saying, you know, our desk booking solution that we use, literally we have it, and in some cases it's used, in some cases it's not. Like in our headquarters, folks know that they're coming in and that they can book a space outside of coming in for like an offsite and an event or whatever, and obviously reserving their conference rooms for breakout spaces. Folks just sit. We have a lot of desks, so folks just tend to plop down and find a desk, but they're not using it. Whereas in other areas like our India office, we use it religiously. So it's interesting for us to see the nuances of where people use it versus where they don't use it. I do love what you said though, and I think our CEO had said this one point in time, which is like, we've got to simplify everything and be super intentional about what's left over. So I think that's sort of something that we're constantly thinking about in, again, just, you know, simplifying the experience of what it means to come in and making everything from, you know, badging in, or if you're just coming in as a guest, to, you know, being able to order your food, book your space, just everything very streamlined. So I think the focus for us is going to be on how do we centralize all this, especially if, you know, what the purpose of coming together is all around like events centric and collaboration and just, you know, kind of having fun and having activities and various things. So lots of opportunity there, I would say, to continue to refine and reframe.
Amazing. Well, thank you, everyone. Really, time flew by. We're at time, we're even 2 minutes over. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us. I appreciate all of your speakers, your highlights, and really powerful messages. Just one last thing, and whoever who is considering transition to flex provider would love to have the opportunity to calculate a little bit of your saving with our custom workspace cost analysis. So if anyone is interested, we're very happy to do so. Our team will reach out to you as well. Great. Thank you, everyone, for your time, for a phenomenal discussion. And have a great rest of your day, and see you in the next Coffee with Gable. Bye, everyone.